All right, today we're going to be looking at this. This is the Gam3Gear, spelt Gam3Gear, the Gam3Gear HD Arcade Emulator. This is a scanline generator, and it's a cheap scanline generator. These are like $35 US on Amazon, and so they're kind of a gimmick. I'm going to say that up front. This is kind of a novelty. It's kind of a gimmick. This is not something I am recommending that you go out and buy right now. In fact, most of you probably aren't going to want this, and so I'm going to start off just saying that. Some of you don't like scanlines at all, and some of you like realistic scanlines, but you don't like fake scanlines. So what I mean by that, if you've looked at modern shaders and how they can do scanlines in a way that replicates really what you would see on a specific television, it might be a consumer television or a PVM, and really emulate the way the scanline can blend colors. The scanlines themselves will get thicker if it's a brighter color. And all that can be emulated very well with modern shaders today. So you can have modern scan lines in software emulation that look very realistic. This is going to be simple scan lines. It's just basically black lines being overlaid on top of the video. Now, the biggest issue with that, the biggest issue with this, is that those lines may or may not actually line up with the video source per its line of resolution, if that makes sense. And some of your actual lines of visible resolution may be thicker than others, similar to like bad scaling in general, because I don't know if this thing knows what the resolution coming in on the input is per se, and I don't think it handles 480p very well. Now, to be fair to it, it's in the name, right? Like, it's the Gam3Gear HD arcade emulator, so they may be expecting that you're putting a 720p or a 1080p signal into here. There's very little information on the website. If you go to the official website for this, I couldn't find any information on even what these switches do or what resolutions it works well with or works with at all, and what resolutions it doesn't work with. So I've got my NES out here and my SNES out here, and we're going to go through a RetroTink 2X. It's just a RetroTink Mini. It's a 2X in that it's a line doubler, so it takes the 240p from the source, line doubles that to 480p, and then it puts out the 480p on the HDMI. So I've got a short little HDMI cable to go from the RetroTink into here, but as far as this thing's concerned, it's getting a 480p signal, which is technically not HD. So we're going to see how that works, and then I'm going to try some other variations, stuff like this. So this is the Hyperkin Mega Retron HD. Now, despite, of course, internally, the games this is playing, it's Sega Genesis games, they're still 240p, but this thing has an upscaler built in, and it's going to output 720p. So when we come out of here and into here, well, now this is getting a 720p input, and so it's going to act very differently, and we will take a look at that. So let's get this stuff plugged in and take a look at it. Okay, this looks like a mess, but we got the NES composite going into the RetroTink, HDMI going into this thing, okay? Now, this is with the scan lines off, and as soon as we turn them on, they're too thick. They're too thick and they don't make any sense in relationship to that source resolution whatsoever. But okay, well, there's a switch on here for width, okay? But when I turn them down to the smaller width, they become invisible. Like, I can't even tell they're on. So I'm assuming this is where they want it. But again, that doesn't make sense. That's not like 240 scan lines. Do we have to count them? Okay, we got the 3 knobs on here, and if we turn them all down, then the scan lines become much more noticeable. Now, if we put them on the slim, yeah, I still can't notice them, changing the width. So, I don't know, I think they're there. They're just not noticeable. Like, I think this is where they want it to be. But that doesn't make sense, does it? Or does it? No, I don't think so. Now again, with all of these turned down all the way, this is the most noticeable. But if we turn them up all the way, and the scan lines are much less noticeable. Maybe this is what they think it's supposed to look like, or I don't know. Are you supposed to have the knobs like in the middle? I think kind of in the middle. Right? But I don't think those scan lines make sense for the source resolution. I just don't. Again, I think at the thickest setting, they're too thick. And at the thinnest, on the thinner setting, like it's just a 2-way switch for your width here. On the thickest setting, they're too thick. On the thinnest setting, you can't see them. Now again, that may be because we're sending this a 240p signal. Sorry, a 480p signal. And this just isn't meant for 480p. It's not meant for that low of a resolution. And at a higher resolution, those scan lines would look smaller. So again, it's in the name. It's called the Gam3Gear HD. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt that it just doesn't like 480p. But let's try the SNES and see if it's any different. All right, I know this is a mess of wires, but we're coming out of the SNES via S-Video into the RetroTink. And again, this is coming out 480p into the Scaneline generator. And again, we have the scan lines on that thick setting. Now, maybe at first glance they look okay, but they don't 100% line up with the source. What do I mean by that? Well, look at like the TM. The scan lines aren't lining up 100% with like the top of the T, for example. So I think because it's not source aware and it's just placing this filter, if you will, over top of the image, it's never going to line up 100%. Now we can change that odd/even, but it's still, see now the scan line is slightly above the line of the T in the TM, and now it's slightly below. So neither one lines up with the image. It just doesn't line up with the resolution whatsoever. Again, I think the scan lines are too thick, but when we put them on the thin setting, they disappear almost completely. Okay, now if we turn these knobs all the way down, they're ever so slightly visible now. Can you see that? I believe that's the proper width, and I believe they even line up with the image better. However, they're almost completely unnoticeable. I've turned the knobs down all the way. Remember with the NES, we couldn't see the scan lines at all when they were in the slimmer mode, or the thinner width. Now we can see them, but just barely. Again, these knobs are all the way down, and if I just turn them up like a quarter of the way, the scan lines aren't visible anymore. Okay, if we go up halfway, there's no way they're visible anymore. Again, for someone, Again, for someone, maybe the fact you can adjust the red, green, and blue separately, I don't know. Maybe that's handy for someone. Maybe someone would like a little device where you can control the red, green, and blue channels, you know, with little hardware knobs. I don't know. Maybe for someone, that's something that you want. But as far as the scan lines go, they're not really usable here. Like, they're either too thick and they don't line up with the source whatsoever, or they're too thin and they're not even noticeable. Again, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right at all. And I think it's because this is only outputting 480p, and this thing's only meant to work with HD, like 720p or 1080p. So again, not necessarily its fault. It's in the name. It's called the Gam3Gear HD arcade emulator. And technically 480p is not HD. So let's assume it's expecting like a 720p or 1080p image. Even if it's a game that's only 240p, even if it's an NES game or an SNES game or a Sega Genesis game, that internally, natively speaking, it's only 240p, but we're upscaling it before it gets to this. And this just does not work well with the 480p that's coming out of the RetroTink. So let's try it with this. This is just going to play Sega Genesis games, but it outputs 720p. So we'll be feeding 720p into here instead of 480p. And let's see if it handles that better. Okay, so now we're coming straight out of here, HDMI, and straight into here. Obviously, the RetroTink's out of the equation now. This is just 720p going into here. And this looks so much better. That is how it should look. I'm pretty sure those scan lines are proportionate to the resolution. If we change the odd and even switch, no, that made it worse. Looking at the top of like the 1900, that is better. It's not 100%. I don't think it's 100% lined up with the image, but it's very, very close. It's close enough that at normal viewing distance, I think this actually looks really good. I'm not gonna lie. This is working a lot better now than it was with the 480p. So I guess that's what it comes down to. This thing just doesn't handle 480p very well, which for retro gaming kind of sucks because... Just gonna hit mute there for a second. Because a lot of us just have line doublers. That could be like a Rad 2X or a RetroTink 2X, RetroTink Mini. A lot of those, anything that says it's like a line doubler, right? It's going to take the 240p from the retro systems and just line double that to 480p. It's not really upscaling. It's a very, well, it is. It's a very simple, fast method of upscaling, which is partially why this simple, cheap thing has absolutely no latency, no lag. But it's not upscaling to HD. It's not upscaling to 720p or 1080p, so this only outputs 480p, and this thing just kind of sucks with 480p. I don't think it's handling it properly. I think it really does need like a 720p or a 1080p signal. As we can see here, coming off the Mega Retron HD, again, this is a 720p signal, and it looks awesome. The scan lines are the proper width. This is on the thicker width setting, but they're not as thick as they were when we were feeding it the 480p signal. So that line width is proportionate to the input resolution that you're feeding it. And I think this looks pretty decent. Again, I understand not everyone likes fake scan lines. But if you want fake scan lines, and maybe you can admit, yeah, it's a bit of a novelty. Yep, they're just very generic fake scan lines, but I prefer this over just the raw image that would be coming out of something like the Mega Retron HD. So maybe you have like the Mega, the Retron N8 or whatever it's called, like the one that just plays NES games. Maybe you have the Super Retron, any of those kind of clone systems that output 720p. Then for the price, again, this thing's like $35 US, if I recall correctly. I paid, I think I don't remember, $45 Canadian. I'll have to double check. So I bought this off Amazon.ca in Canada here. So it is readily available. It's widely available. I was able to get it on Amazon.ca, shipped from Canada. And then again, like I said, it's $35 US from what I recall. So yeah, it's affordable, right? So as a novelty, as just kind of for fun, again, maybe you have several of these types of clone systems that output 720p. I think it's pretty ideal for stuff like this. The issue is not handling 480p. For me, with my RetroTink, it kind of kills it for using like my NES or my SNES, my real retro systems with. It kind of just defeats the purpose. It doesn't, the scan lines are so off that it's not usable, and I would not want to use it. On here, it looks pretty good. The issue with that is I don't know how many people own multiple systems like this that can't already do its own scan lines. So if you've got like a RetroPie or some sort of other emulation system or an FPGA system, something that can play multiple systems, it's going to already have its own scanline features, and this is useless. This is utterly pointless for anything like that. So you would have to own several systems like this for this to be worth it. If you do own several systems like this, then yes, for $35 US, this thing actually looks pretty good. I'm going to say that over and over again. With the 720p source, it looks decent. Is it perfect? No. I still don't think the scan lines are 100% lined up with the source. They're not source aware. It's just putting a filter over the image, and whether that's going to line up 100% on the, I guess, like vertical axis, lining up with the horizontal resolution or the horizontal lines of resolution, if you will, no. I still don't think it's lined up because, again, I don't think it's source aware. It's just very simply putting the filter over top. Now, if you had control, if you had a like exact fine control over that overlay per se, that would actually be pretty cool. That said, I think it looks good enough at 720p that it's worth it. But again, you'd have to own a few systems like this that output 720p to make this worthwhile. Again, if you've got like the Raspberry Pi there, well, you can do scan lines in the software. If you've got like your SNES or your SNES Classic Mini Editions, those output 720p, but they have their own scanline options in there. And if you like fake scan lines, you're probably just going to use those. At least they're source aware. At least they're like resolution aware, and the scan lines will line up with the source. At least there's that. They're not perfect either. I get it. They're still fake scan lines, and I get it. Some of you just are not going to like fake scan lines. Anything beyond that, if you're using your PC to emulate, and maybe your PC's at 1080p or your monitor's at 1080p, your PC can do better scan lines than this anyways. So when you're at the point where you've already got something that could scale up to 1080p, if you've already got a high-end scaler, if you've already got, like, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming something like a RetroTink, what is it, the 5X can do its own scan lines. Obviously, the RetroTink 4K can do its own scan lines. I don't know about the OSSC. If an OSSC can do its own scan lines, then this is also irrelevant, right? So if you've already got something that can upscale to, say, 1080p, which would be ideal for a 4K TV for other reasons, then, again, that thing can probably already do its own scan lines, just like your your Raspberry Pi, just like your, again, if you have some sort of like a Mister type of a thing that can already do its own, fake scan lines, or even probably better scan lines on something like a Mister. Point is, you've probably already got something that can do better scan lines, especially if you're emulating on a PC, or any kind of mini PC or anything like that. So this is a very, very narrow group of people that would find this useful. Again, I thought, oh, that'd be a great little companion with the RetroTink Mini, but I don't think so. As far as I can tell, I've tried playing with all the settings. I've tried this ratio button on the top. I've tried, turning this VSync on and off. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to work very well with the 480p coming from my RetroTink, which, again, for my retro systems going through the RetroTink, it makes this thing useless. And like, other than this thing, I don't have much use for it. And I don't really have any other systems like this that are systems that I would want to play that only put out 720p, or I should say that do put out 720p, but don't have their own built-in scanline option, which would be more resolution aware and more source aware, more resolution aware. This thing, as far as I can tell, is not source or resolution aware. And if your scan lines just happen to line up with where they are supposed to line up on the game's image, is almost a shot in the dark. Again, the odd even thing on here is never perfect. And as you saw with the thicker scan lines on the NES, it was never perfect either. With one setting, the scan lines were too high, and in another setting, they were too low. They were never lined up with the game's resolution per se. So, wow. That's a lot, I know. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I really don't recommend this thing for most people. I just don't. It's a gimmick, like I said at the beginning of the video. It's a bit of a novelty, like I said at the beginning of the video. For $35 US, it can afford to be a novelty. It can afford to be a gimmick. If you have some systems that output 720p, can't do their own scanline options, and you like fake scan lines, again, I think they look okay here. So, take them or leave them. Some people like scan lines. Not even talking about good scan lines here. We're just talking about kind of crappy fake scan lines, to be honest. Some people would still like this, and I can understand that. I get it. I don't think this looks bad. In fact, I think this looks pretty decent, all things considered. But again, it only looks pretty decent when we're feeding it the 720p off here, the 480p off these. With my RetroTink, is crap. So, again, it's such a narrow slice of my viewers or anyone watching this video that really should want this or need this. But nonetheless, if that happens to be you, even if you say, yeah, I know it's kind of a novelty, yeah, I know it's kind of a gimmick, again, it's $35 US. It can afford, to be a gimmick. Just if you want to have some fun with some scan lines that you're not taking too seriously, again, I think it looks pretty good. So, yeah, this is with the scan lines on, that's with the scan lines off. That's with the scan lines on, that's with the scan lines off. And on one last time. I really do think they look acceptable. They're not nearly as good as the scan lines you can do in modern software emulation with a PC. So you need hardware that's already upscaling to at least 720p, and there you go. If that's you, this thing might be for you. It's not for most of you, and I'm not going to recommend most of you should even look at this thing. So that's it. I don't know if that's a good review or a bad review. Kind of is what it is. If it works with 480p better, I would probably recommend it for more of you, and myself included. But for me personally, again, not being able to work with 480p kind of kills it. That's the whole reason I wanted it, was to link up with that in a way that if I wanted to play NES or SNES, I could have scan lines on, you know, with real hardware, have scan lines on my TV if I wanted them, even knowing they're kind of 100% not the greatest, just for fun, just as a gimmick. Yes, I kind of did want to use that with that, but it's utterly useless with it. So, yep, sorry, not the greatest review. I don't know why I'm apologizing. I bought the goddamn thing myself. It's not like they sent it to me. And I gotta say, I watched a couple of reviews from other YouTubers on this, and none of them mentioned that the scan lines don't line up with the image. None of them mentioned it's not really source or resolution aware. As far as fake scan lines go, they're literally the worst. But like I said, they look okay. If you like fake scan lines, you have something that can output 720p or 1080p. I'm assuming it's going to look just as good with 1080p as it is here with 720p. Playing games on it, I didn't notice any additional latency, so that is a bonus. That's a plus there. I'm not super susceptible, and I don't have the equipment to test lag. I got to assume the HDMI video going through this thing and getting processed in the way it's getting processed with literally things I can adjust the RGB values with, which is, it's kind of cool to play with, let's be honest. The fact it's doing that, I got to assume there's some latency coming through this thing. But again, it wasn't enough for me to notice during gameplay. I'm just playing some like Super Mario Brothers and some Super Mario World on it. So, yeah. Geez, I should probably just shut up now. That's it. See you guys later. Probably don't buy this thing, but maybe you're that one person that it fills that need for. Maybe that's you. But it's probably not you, but maybe it's you. Goodbye.